They didn't just insult the woman I love, they made her feel small. And that's the night I stopped being their father and became their reckoning. You ever sit at a table where every smile feels like a lie? That night, I did. It was a rainy Friday in November, and I remember because the windshield wipers were groaning like they were tired of being polite, just like me. I was dressed in my best navy shirt, the one Evie said made my eyes look less tired. She sat beside me in the passenger seat, her hands folded in her lap. She looked calm, but I could see the tension in her neck, the little twitch of her fingers. Meeting my kids for the first time, that kind of pressure could crack stone. Evie had no idea what she was walking into. She wore a simple black dress and a cardigan that hugged her shoulders. No makeup beyond lip balm. Her perfume was barely there, something floral and faint. The kind of woman who spoke softly but left a mark. She had that librarian grace, the kind of energy you lean into when the world gets loud, and I was proud of her. Damn proud. I hadn't brought anyone to a family dinner since my wife died 8 years ago. I thought the kids would respect that. We pulled into Laura's driveway just before 6. The house was glowing like a magazine cover. White string lights on the porch. That fake wreath she insisted was tasteful. I remember thinking it looked like a stage, and maybe that was the first sign. We were walking into a performance, not a dinner. Dan opened the door. My oldest. 40 years old and aging like someone who mistakes Botox for wisdom. He gave me a hug like a handshake, all shoulder and no warmth. Then he looked at Evie. His smile didn't even reach his teeth. "Hey, Dad," he said, then looked Evie up and down. "You must be the new retirement hobby." I froze. Evie laughed it off, trying to be kind. She extended her hand. "Evie, it's nice to meet you." Dan just nodded, already turning away. Inside, Laura was setting the table like she'd won a prize for passive aggression. She wore pearls. Who the hell wears pearls for lasagna? She gave Evie a look I can only describe as the kind you'd give a raccoon on your porch. Suspicious, irritated, waiting for it to leave. "Hi," she said sweetly. "You look young enough to be the babysitter." And then she laughed like she'd said something clever. Evie smiled. "Well, I read a lot of bedtime stories." I chuckled. I shouldn't have. It only made Laura's jaw tighten. Kate arrived last. 35, my youngest. She didn't speak, just gave Evie a once-over like she was inventory. She didn't even hug me. Just a stiff, "Hey," and then off to pour herself wine. The look on her face, like someone had tracked mud across her white carpet. We sat down for dinner. The table was beautiful. Laura always had an eye for setting a scene. But the warmth was paper thin. Evie tried her best, asking Dan about his job in finance, complimenting Laura's cooking, asking Kate about her dog. Dan barely answered. Laura pretended not to hear. Kate? She scrolled on her phone like we were invisible. At one point, Evie made a joke about how she and I had met at a community gardening event. She'd confused sage for mint, and I'd offered to trade plants. I remember the way she told it, soft and bright, her eyes lighting up. And that's when Laura cut in. "Cute," she said, sipping her wine. "Does he still pretend he can cook? Or do you do all the real work now?" My hand curled into a fist under the table. Evie just smiled. "Actually, he made the best chili I've ever had last week." That's when Kate looked up and muttered, "She's just trying too hard." The words hung there like smoke. Evie stood up suddenly. "Excuse me," she said, voice barely above a whisper. She walked out the sliding door and onto the porch. The rain had started again, tapping against the windows. I stared after her for a moment, then looked around the table. Nobody moved. Dan popped a bite of lasagna. You sure know how to pick 'em, Dad. I stood up so fast my chair scraped loud against the hardwood. You're right, I said. I do. I followed Evie outside. She stood by the railing, arms crossed, face tilted up toward the rain. Her mascara was smudged, barely there, like the moment had smeared something sacred. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I didn't mean to. You did nothing wrong. She looked at me, and I saw it then. Not just sadness, not just embarrassment. It was heartbreak. Because she had come here open, hopeful, wanting to be part of something. And they'd handed her a blade and asked her to smile while bleeding. I felt something crack inside me. Maybe it had been building for years. The dismissive jokes, the lack of calls, the way they looked at me like I was a problem to manage, not a man to love. I'd made excuses. They're busy. They're still grieving. They'll come around. But tonight wasn't discomfort. It was war. When we got back to my house, Evie went straight to bed, said she had a headache. I sat in the living room with the lights off, just listening to the rain on the roof. I stared at my hands, at the veins and wrinkles and scars from a lifetime of building things. And I thought about everything I'd built that had turned against me. The next morning, I found a note from Evie on the table. I don't want to come between you and your family. I love you. I'll understand if... I didn't finish reading it. I folded it up, slipped it into my wallet. Then I went out back, looked at the old shed, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't see storage. I saw a battlefield. I saw a blueprint. Because if they wanted war, they were about to learn who taught them how to fight. The first real silence came 3 days after that dinner. It started small. A group text that used to buzz with grandkid photos and leftover dinner invites suddenly went dark. I sent a message, something simple like, thinking of you all, and it sat there unread for 2 days. When I finally got a reply, it was a thumbs-up emoji. From Kate. You ever watch a door close 1 inch at a time, slow enough that you almost don't notice it's being locked? That was what it felt like. Dan didn't call. Laura posted a family photo on Facebook. Her kids, even the damn dog, all smiling in a park I used to take them to as kids. The caption read, "Some families just get it. No tag, no message." But I knew. I showed it to Evie. She didn't say a word. She just handed me back the phone and kissed me on the cheek. Evie was hurting, I could tell. But she never asked me to pick sides. She folded my laundry while I sulked. She baked banana bread and left it cooling on the stove like a peace offering. She'd touch my arm in the kitchen and say, "They'll come around." But I wasn't interested in waiting anymore. The final crack came in aisle 3 at Henderson's Market, of all places. Evie had run in to grab some flour, and I followed a few steps behind. Laura's voice hit me like a slap. I don't care if she volunteers at the damn library. It's disgusting. That woman's just waiting for his will to kick in. I froze behind the cereal display. Evie was 2 aisles away, reading labels. Laura stood near the produce with some woman I didn't know, dressed in yoga gear like she just came from a gossip workout. I mean, she's what? In her 40s? He's a senior citizen. It's pathetic. I should have stepped out, said something. Instead, I stood there, watching her words land like pebbles in a pond, each one sinking deep. Evie didn't hear it. Not then. But later that night, she asked me if I thought the kids would ever accept her. I didn't lie. No, I said. Not as long as they think they can control me. That was when the idea first started to take shape, like a storm cloud rolling in at the edge of a field. I'd been patient. I'd been quiet. I'd told myself a dozen stories to excuse their behavior, but excuses are a form of surrender, and I was done surrendering. I started spending more time in the backyard, staring at the old shed. It used to be my place, back when my hands still worked without aching and my mind didn't fog with grief. After my wife died, I locked it up. Couldn't bring myself to walk through the smell of sawdust and old coffee. It felt like stepping into a mausoleum. But now, it felt like a door I needed to open. Evie caught me staring at it one morning while we drank coffee on the porch. She followed my gaze, then set down her mug. "You ever think about fixing it up?" she asked. I looked at her. "You mean the shed?" She shrugged. "Could be something. A workshop. A space for you." I didn't answer. Not yet. Later that day, I walked out back with a wrench and twisted the rusted lock off the shed door. The hinges screamed like they were being woken from a long sleep. Inside, everything was coated in dust. Tools, shelves, a half-finished chair frame. There was an old photo of my wife pinned to the wall, from the year we built the deck. She was laughing, mid-hammer swing. I stood there, breathing in the silence. It wasn't grief anymore. It was fuel. That night, while Evie read on the couch, I went upstairs and found an old key ring. One of them matched the door at the end of the hallway, the one the kids used to treat like their personal guest suite whenever they visited. I installed a new deadbolt on it, quietly. Evie noticed it the next morning. Locking up the hallway? Just setting boundaries. She gave me a long look, then nodded. "You thinking about fixing things with them?" she asked gently. "No," I said. "I'm thinking about fixing things for us." The next weekend came and went without a call. Not from Dan, not from Laura, not even from Kate, who used to text me whenever she needed gas money or help with her damn dog's vet bill. Evie and I had dinner alone. We laughed. We watched a movie. And for the first time in a long time, the silence in the house felt right. But something had changed in me. It wasn't just disappointment anymore. It was resolve. This wasn't just about Evie. It wasn't even about the kids. It was about the man I'd spent 6 decades becoming, and whether I'd let a few snide remarks from blood relatives define my last chapters. I hadn't touched a chisel in years. But the next morning, I stood in that shed with a broom in one hand and a hammer in the other. The dust didn't scare me. The silence didn't either. You see, a man can only be quiet for so long before the stillness starts to sound like permission. And I wasn't giving anyone permission anymore. I hadn't expected to hear my name in the hardware store, not like that. Evie and I were picking out new hinges for the shed door. The old ones had rusted to hell and were hanging on by habit more than screws. She held up a pack of brushed brass, asking if they'd match the original wood. I was about to answer when I heard it. "She's got him restoring furniture now. Gold diggers age slower on someone else's pension." The words weren't whispered. They were projected, the way people talk when they want to make sure you hear without making eye contact. My hand froze on the shelf. Evie's head tilted, just slightly. She'd heard it too. I turned, slowly. 2 women stood near the light bulb display, both with cartfuls of fall decor. One of them wore a church volunteer shirt. The other? Laura's friend, the realtor with too much lipstick and a smile like broken glass. They didn't look at me, but I saw the smirk. I saw it twist like a knife. Evie placed the hinges in the cart, her jaw set. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. That night she cried in the kitchen. It was quiet, subtle, just her shoulders shaking over the sink while she washed dishes we hadn't even dirtied. I stood behind her, unsure what to do. My gut told me to hold her. My pride told me to find a bat and go looking for those women. Instead, I reached out, touched her back. She flinched, just a little. "Don't let them live in your head," I said, voice low. They don't, she whispered, wiping her eyes with a dish towel. But they sure know how to sneak in. She turned and looked at me. Do you think I'm with you for your money? That question cut deeper than anything my kids could have said. No, I said, but I think they're scared because they know you're with me for love. And that's something they stopped understanding a long time ago. She nodded slowly, then added, maybe you should tell them that. But I wasn't going to tell them. I was going to show them. The next morning, I drove to the community college and signed up for a refresher course in woodworking. Not because I needed it. Hell, I could plane an oak board blindfolded. But I needed the connections, people, community. The kind of thing I used to have when my wife was alive and the kids still came around for more than estate talk. By the following week, I'd reopened the shed, cleaned it, hung my old tools, sharpened every chisel, polished the lathe, and Evie, bless her, helped me start an Instagram page, called it Rust and Heart. First post, a picture of a cracked rocking chair I found at the junk store. Caption, she's old, but still rocks better than most of us. Time to bring her back to life. It got 6 likes in the first hour. By the next morning, it had 80. Someone in town messaged asking if I could repair their porch swing. By Friday, I had 3 jobs lined up and a teen named Micah knocking on the gate asking if I took apprentices. He was nervous. Skinny kid. Called me sir too many times. I just want to learn, he said. My dad left when I was little. Mom says I should stay busy. I didn't hesitate. Grab a broom. You start today. The shed started to smell like life again. Cedar dust and linseed oil, coffee and youth. Evie brought sandwiches most afternoons, and sometimes we'd sit on the back step watching Micah learn how to sand with the grain. It felt like I was building something again, not just tables or chairs. A legacy. Dan found out from someone at the bank. Laura saw the Instagram and texted, "Are you seriously trying to be an influencer now?" I didn't reply. Then came the post. Kate, ever the quiet one, shared a photo on her story. It was a still from our hardware store visit. Me, standing by the hinges. Evie beside me. The caption read, "Nothing ages a man faster than desperation." And below it, just 2 emojis, a coffin and a money bag. It got dozens of laughs. Even a comment from someone I recognized, Dan's old college friend. Classic midlife crisis. Good luck, old man. Micah saw it before I did. He didn't know it was about me at first. When he showed me, I felt something tighten behind my ribs. Not pain, not even anger. Clarity. I was done playing the quiet father. The bank account. The soft voice on the phone who still sent birthday cards even when they came back unopened. I looked at Evie, who was pretending not to cry again, this time in the workshop instead of the kitchen. I took her hand, held it firm, let the sawdust stick to our skin. "I built a family once," I said. She looked up. "I can dismantle one too." The first piece I restored was a widow's end table. It had one leg broken clean off, a chunk missing from the edge like it had taken a hit during a move and never recovered. She said it belonged to her late husband, and she hadn't had the heart to throw it away. The woman, Jeanette, was maybe in her late 70s, all silver hair and garden gloves, standing at my shed door like it was a confessional booth. "I heard you used to fix things," she said. "I still do," I told her. She smiled. "Good. So do I." That table came back to life over 2 afternoons and 1 slow evening. I replaced the missing edge with matching oak, then carved a single rose into the underside. Not for show, just something I knew she'd find one day while dusting. When she came to pick it up, Jeanette didn't cry. She ran her hand over the surface, nodded once, and whispered, "It feels like he's still here." She handed me a small tin of oatmeal cookies and walked away. I didn't charge her. Micah was in the corner, watching all of it, his hands covered in sawdust and learning. I gave him a nod, and he smiled like someone who'd just seen a miracle. That was the first job that mattered. Word spread. It wasn't a business, not yet, but people kept coming. They brought broken chairs, antique lamps, shattered cabinet doors, and stories. They brought grief in the shape of furniture, and I offered something they didn't expect: repair, not just to the wood, but to the meaning. Evie helped me create a small website. She handled the photos, wrote the captions, replied to messages while I worked. We didn't call it a business. We called it healing with your hands. The name we finally chose was scrawled across a piece of driftwood and nailed to the shed door: Rust and Heart. Dan came by one morning. I didn't expect him. He pulled up in his company-leased Mercedes, stepped out in a windbreaker, and that fake casualness people wear when they're hunting for a reason to be angry. "You seriously turned the shed into a TikTok workshop?" he said, glancing around. "It's not TikTok," I replied, setting down the lathe chisel. "It's just work." He looked at the apprentice. "Who's the kid?" "I'm Micah," he said before I could stop him. Dan turned to me. "So you're mentoring now? What, are you trying to become some kind of local grandpa figure?" "I'm just fixing what people bring me." Dan shook his head. "You're embarrassing yourself, Dad. You're not a craftsman anymore. You're 70 and semi-retired. This isn't how people your age live." Evie stepped outside just then with 2 mugs of coffee. She handed one to Micah, who took it with both hands like it was made of gold. Dan looked her up and down. "Of course," he muttered. I stepped closer. "You came here for something, Dan. What is it?" He didn't answer, just looked around one more time and said, "They're all laughing, you know. Laura, Kate, everyone." I smiled. "Good," I said. "Let them laugh while I build something that matters." He scoffed and got back in his car. Micah waited until the Mercedes was out of earshot, then asked, "That your son?" "Used to be," I said. The following week, a local reporter came by, said she'd heard about the Shed revival and wanted to do a short feature for the paper's weekend insert. I let her walk around. I talked about tools, restoration, grief, and second chances. She took pictures, one of me and Micah holding up a refinished bench, one of Evie laughing with her hand over her mouth. The article ran 2 Sundays later. Headline: Rust and Heart: How One Man Turned a Broken Family into a Community Space. It was well written, respectful, and it spread like a brush fire. Orders doubled. A couple from out of town brought their toddler's crib, 20 years old, now falling apart, but full of memories. A retired teacher asked if I could turn her old piano bench into a keepsake box. I said yes to all of it. But what I didn't expect? The teens. A group of high schoolers showed up one afternoon, half of them clearly dragged by the others. They'd seen the article, wanted to learn, wanted to make something with their hands instead of scrolling their thumbs across a screen all day. One of them asked, "Can we hang here after school? We don't really have anywhere else." Evie answered before I could. "Of course," she said, "but you clean up after yourselves, and no swearing." Micah grinned. "That includes you, Tom." That was the day I realized this wasn't about revenge anymore. Not entirely. It was about reclaiming purpose, making meaning, giving kids like Micah and broken parents like me a space to create instead of collapse. And my kids? Dan posted something that same weekend on his social media. "Some folks just can't handle retirement. Midlife crisis disguised as a hobby shed." I didn't respond, but I did frame the newspaper article and hang it above the workbench. People ask if it's my proudest piece. It's not. But it's a damn good reminder that I'm not done. Not by a long shot. The envelope came on a Monday. No return address. Just my full name typed in block letters like a warning shot. I opened it in the shed, the smell of old pine and fresh glue still clinging to my hands. Inside were copies. Legal ones. Printed with that sharp-smelling ink lawyers always seem to use. The title said, Petition for Voluntary Guardianship of Assets, Draft Only. But the names were there. Dan and Laura, co-guardians, Kate as a backup. They'd started planning how to control my estate. I read the first paragraph 3 times. Then I sat down on the work stool and stared at the concrete floor for a long time. Micah was sanding a bookshelf behind me. Evie was inside working on her emails. The sun was slipping behind the pine trees, and something in me just went cold. The petition framed it as concern, that I was showing signs of erratic financial behavior, that Evie's presence had disrupted family dynamics, that I was no longer engaging in traditional retirement practices. The translation? He's not being quiet anymore. He's not playing dead. He's still living, and worse, loving. I showed the envelope to Evie that night after dinner. Her face didn't change much, just tightened around the mouth. She didn't cry, didn't panic. She just placed her hand on mine and said, "Do you want me to leave?" That question hurt more than the papers. "No," I said. "I want them to." The next morning I called a friend I hadn't spoken to in 15 years, Mike Sanders, a guy I met in the Marines who went on to become a lawyer in New Hampshire. Tough as nails, still called me Sergeant like we were in our 20s. "Need to bury something?" he asked when I explained. "Yeah," I said. "My patience." He laughed and told me to send everything. Said he'd call me back in 2 days. He called back in 2 hours. "They're trying to freeze you out before you die," he said. "Classic strategy. You're the castle. They're just moving siege towers closer. Can we stop them?" He snorted. "I don't stop. I retaliate." That's when I told him my idea. By Friday, I'd rewritten every legal document that ever had their names on it. The will, the power of attorney, the healthcare proxy, even the trust my wife and I set up years ago for the grandchildren's benefit. Mike made it airtight, and then we created something new, a foundation, in my late wife's name, the Margaret Hale Woodworking and Wellness Trust. The mission? To fund mental health and creative restoration programs for the elderly, widowed, and underserved. Based right here at Rust and Hart. Evie was named co-trustee, not beneficiary, not spouse. Co-trustee. Dan, Laura, and Kate, removed, fully, irrevocably. I even gave Micah a spot in the bylaws, junior craftsmanship liaison. The kid cried when I showed him the folder, said his mom was going to flip. "You're building something real," he whispered. "Most people don't." When the official documents came back signed and sealed, I held them in my hands like I was holding armor. Mike called again. "They're gonna scream," he said. "Let them," I replied. I didn't tell Evie until everything was finalized. I wanted it to be done, not dangled. She read the documents slowly, her eyes scanning every line. When she reached the trustee clause, she looked at me like I'd handed her a key to something she never dared ask for. "You trust me with this?" "I trust you with everything." The next week, Dan called. First time in over a month. He didn't start with hello. He started with, "What the hell is this I'm hearing about a foundation?" I let the silence stretch. "Laura said your house isn't even in your name anymore. That true?" "Sounds like someone's been reading public records," I said calmly. "You can't just cut us out like that." "I didn't cut you out, Dan," I said. "You stepped out. I just locked the door behind you." Click. He hung up. That night, Laura sent me an email. Short, nasty. "You're destroying this family, all because of some woman who reads books and makes banana bread." I forwarded it to Mike. The next morning, she received a formal cease and desist for defamation and emotional harassment. Mike's idea. I didn't hear from Kate, not directly, but I did see her post on social media. Money makes monsters out of men, even the ones who raised you. It had a photo attached of me and Evie at the last Rustin Hart open house. She'd clearly screenshotted it from the local paper. I was holding a wooden plaque. Evie was smiling. Micah stood behind us with sawdust in his hair. I stared at that post for a long time. Then I printed it out and tacked it to the shed wall, right next to the quote that Margaret once embroidered and hung in our living room. "Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you build that no one can tear down." The flyer showed up in my mailbox, tucked between grocery ads and an oil change coupon. Bright blue and gold, printed on thick cardstock, as if that made it more holy. "Family First, a community dinner and conversation, hosted by the Hale siblings." Right there, printed like some corporate merger. Laura, Dan, and Kate. No mention of me, no invitation, no RSVP. The fine print was worse. A night of food, stories, and guidance for our beloved seniors as they transition into life's later chapters. Guidance. They'd weaponized kindness into a PR stunt. I set the flyer down and stared out the kitchen window. Evie was in the backyard brushing sawdust off Micah's hoodie while he raked leaves. The light was starting to change, that golden hour blur where shadows stretch long across the fence. I thought of Margaret then, how she used to put out a thermos of cider when fall settled in, how she made even dying leaves feel like something to celebrate. And now our children were using our name to talk down to people like us. I called the church that afternoon, told them I'd be attending. The receptionist hesitated. "Are you on the list, sir?" "No," I said, "but I'm in the family." Evie offered to come, but I told her no. Not because I was embarrassed, but because I knew I had to walk into that fellowship hall carrying every quiet year they tried to erase and set it on fire. The church basement smelled like coffee and nostalgia. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the tables were set with paper placemats printed with puzzles and corny religious quotes. A crock-pot line wound down one wall, guarded by Laura in an apron like she was doing penance for something. Dan stood at a podium near the back, flanked by Kate in a turtleneck so tight I could see her judgment before she even saw me. I didn't sign in, didn't take a plate. I just walked past the rolls and coleslaw, past the folding chairs and the whispering faces, and stood near the coffee urn, waiting. Kate was the first to spot me. Her face didn't change, but her posture did, like she was bracing for wind. Dan cleared his throat into the microphone. "Thank you all for coming tonight. We're here because aging isn't easy. We get that. That's why we want to share resources, tell stories, and..." I stepped forward. "Tell stories?" I said. "Well, I've got one." The room turned. Dan stared at me like I'd crashed his wedding. Laura looked down, pretending to organize pie forks. Kate froze, one hand gripping her elbow. I walked up to the front and turned to face the crowd. About 50 people, mostly over 60. Familiar faces, church folks, neighbors, people who once sent Christmas cards when Margaret was still alive. I pulled a letter from my jacket. "This," I said, holding it up, "is for my grandchildren. It's a letter I wrote after my kids, those 3 right there, made the woman I love cry. After they spread rumors, mocked my workshop, and tried to take away my right to live my life on my terms." A hush settled like dust. Dan stepped forward. "Dad, this isn't the time." "It is," I said louder. because the time to speak up is always exactly when someone wants you quiet. I unfolded the paper. "Dear Emma, Caleb, and Lily," I began, "you may hear things about me, that I've changed, that I've become reckless, stubborn, selfish. I want you to know that's true. I have changed, because I finally remembered that love isn't about control. It's about presence and respect." Laura's lips parted, the first signs of panic rising behind her perfectly lipsticked smile. I kept going. "If anyone ever tries to make you feel like love is something you have to earn through obedience, walk away. If they call silence maturity and compliance loyalty, look them in the eye and ask what they're afraid of. If someone calls you selfish for protecting your joy, ask what joy they were trying to take from you." A woman in the back sniffled. Another leaned forward, hands clasped. I folded the letter. "Respect," I said, "isn't something you inherit. It's something you build. And the moment someone makes you feel small for being alive in the way that makes you feel whole, that's not family. That's just architecture. Blood without blueprint." Dan stepped up again. "Okay, that's enough. Let's not—" I turned to him. "You had your stage. Now I've had mine." Then I looked at the crowd. "My door is still open, but you better bring truth, not turkey." I walked out before applause or silence could decide who won. The next day, the pastor called me. He'd been sitting in the back row. "You know," he said, "they meant well, but they went too far." "They always do," I said. He paused. "That letter, would you consider reading it next Sunday, during open testimony?" I didn't answer right away, but I knew I would. Not because I wanted revenge anymore, but because some truths need echo, and I'd spent too long whispering. We opened the doors on a Saturday. No ribbon cutting, no news crew, no paid influencers with ring lights and hashtags, just coffee, warm cider, and the faint scent of linseed oil drifting through the autumn air. The sign above the door was hand-carved. Micah had burned the letters himself into reclaimed oak, rust and heart. We didn't call it a business. We called it a space, part gallery, part workshop, part something else entirely, a shelter for people who'd been told they had nothing left to offer. The kind of place I'd once needed when my hands forgot how to be useful after Margaret died. Evie arranged the front room with prints of every piece we'd restored. There was Jeanette's end table, Mr. Rawlings' old hope chest, a church pew someone found broken behind a thrift shop, now reborn into a reading bench with a quote from Psalms carved beneath the seat. "He restoreth my soul." Micah made a flyer that read, "We fix wood, we don't fix people. But sometimes it's the same thing." People came. Teenagers with nowhere to go after school. Widowers still wearing their wedding rings. A veteran named Hal who hadn't held a chisel in 30 years, but started showing up just to sand scrap wood down to smooth slivers, saying nothing and nodding when someone passed him a coffee. One woman brought in a broken mirror frame and whispered, "My husband threw it the day he left. I kept it anyway. Think you can make it hold again?" We could. We did. We taught them to measure, to cut, to carve. Micah led a class on dovetail joints and surprised himself by how well he explained it. Evie organized a story bench event, where people sat on a communal bench and told one story, about grief, about healing, about whatever the hell they needed to let go of. It felt like church, but without guilt. Word spread. Local paper ran a follow-up. From family fallout to community firelight, the shed that became a sanctuary. And then a magazine picked it up. New England Revival, some glossy seasonal thing with flannel ads and pumpkin soup recipes. They called me Man of the Season. The article said, "At 62, Tom Hale turned a pile of scrap and a broken heart into a movement. Dan saw it. Of course he did. He didn't text me, but one of his business partners did. "Hey, Tom," the message read. "Didn't realize you were the face of this new community movement. We've been trying to get something like this off the ground for our wellness clients. Would love to chat." That was the moment I realized something. Their world runs on clout. Mine now runs on care, and mine was winning. The fallout came quick. Dan's partners pulled back. One of them, Eli, a guy I'd once helped fix a fence, sent me a message saying, "We're reconsidering our PR alignment. The family stuff, it's just not a good look." I didn't reply, but I did print the message and pin it beside Micah's work schedule. He read it, nodded once, and added his own note underneath. "Let the truth sand them down." Micah had become something I hadn't expected. A leader. Kids listened when he spoke. Adults respected him. He started drafting plans for expansion, maybe a side building, a winter-friendly classroom space, even a mobile setup to take tools into the community. Evie watched it all with quiet pride. She didn't need a spotlight. She just needed the warmth. One night as we locked up, she turned to me and said, "You know this isn't just a workshop anymore." "I know," I said. "It's a shield." She tilted her head. "Against what?" "Loneliness, shame, all the things our own kids threw at us and expected us to carry." She smiled. We replaced the weight. We walked home holding hands like teenagers who didn't know the world yet. The next week, a woman knocked on our door. Mid-60s maybe, with stiff shoulders and a face that looked like it used to smile more. She introduced herself as Joan, said she worked with the town's mental health board. "We've had 3 referrals this month," she said. "All of them mentioned your place, said it's where they feel, well, like they matter." I offered her a chair. She didn't sit. "I'm here to ask if you'd consider becoming a permanent partner, a local safe space initiative. We'd fund part of it. All I need is your signature and a title." I glanced at Evie, who just raised an eyebrow. "What title?" I asked. Joan smiled. "Director." Evie blinked. "Me?" "You," Joan said. "You're the heart in Rust and Heart. Everyone says so." Evie didn't answer right away, just stood still, hands still resting on the table's edge, like she was checking to make sure it wasn't a dream. Eventually, she nodded, and I swear I saw Margaret smile through her. That night, we celebrated with cider and loud music in the shed. Hal danced. Jeanette brought cookies again. Micah tried to pretend he didn't cry when we hung his photo under the words, "Every teacher starts by holding broken wood." I didn't check my phone all night. But the next morning, I saw it. Dan's business account had been deactivated, and Kate's newest post had only 2 likes. Meanwhile, ours was flooded with photos of people holding the things they'd fixed, and smiling like they'd fixed themselves, too. It started with a knock. Not the kind that comes from neighbors. This one had rhythm. Formal. The kind of knock that carries weight in its echo. Evie opened the door while I was finishing a refinishing job in the shed. She called for me. I wiped my hands and stepped into the hallway just in time to see the envelope pass from a man in a dark blazer to her trembling fingers. "Subpoena?" I asked. "Close," she said. "It's from their lawyer." I didn't have to ask who there was. Dan, Laura, Kate. I slit the seal with the tip of my chisel. 3 pages, legal letterhead, language sharp as glass. They were threatening to challenge the trust, the foundation, the workshop, the house, everything I'd legally transferred and protected, now under scrutiny. The claim? Undue influence. That Evie had manipulated me into excluding them. That my cognitive faculties were compromised by emotional duress. They were trying to call me senile. Evie sat down slowly at the kitchen table. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stared ahead, face stone still. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be," I said. "They're not after you. They're terrified of something they can't control. That's all." I called Mike, told him everything. He didn't flinch, just muttered, "These kids must think I'm soft in my old age. I'll file countersuits so fast their grandkids will owe you apologies." Then he paused. "But Tom, this might go public." "I know," I said. "Are you ready for that?" I looked at Evie, still sitting at the table, back straight, chin high like someone refusing to drown. "Yes," I said. "Let them come." The filings took 2 weeks. Mike was surgical. He dug up every message Dan had sent that hinted at coercion, every email Laura wrote about getting control of the assets, every document Kate touched during that guardianship draft. And then we found the nail. A recorded phone call between Kate and a notary, caught by the notary's own quality assurance software, where she joked, "If he keeps going senile, we'll just tuck him into a home and hope the will's done by Christmas." Mike lit up like a soldier with a target. We included it in the countersuit. The local paper caught wind. Someone leaked the filing, probably one of Mike's paralegals, not that I cared. And suddenly, the narrative wasn't about a sweet old man duped by a younger woman. It was about 3 adult children trying to strip their father of autonomy to secure a payday. Evie stayed off social media, but I saw the headlines. Undue influence or family greed. Town hero at center of inheritance dispute. Rust and Hart founder fights back against estate grab. Dan tried to release a statement through a PR rep. It was stiff, overly sanitized, something about acting in the best interest of a parent we love deeply. The comments shredded him. Maybe love your dad while he's alive instead of salivating over what he leaves behind. I used to work for his son. All they care about is image. Team Tom. That one stuck. People started tagging Rust and Hart on every photo of fixed furniture or smiling teenagers with Sanders in their hands. Team Tom trended for 2 days in our little corner of the internet, and through all of it, Evie never flinched, until the podcast. A local journalist hosted a community show. One episode focused entirely on elder abuse, and one of the guests, anonymous but unmistakably Laura, implied that some women target grieving men to infiltrate estates. When I played it for Evie, I watched something inside her fracture. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She stood up, went out to the workshop, then came back with the key to the file drawer. "What are you doing?" I asked. She placed a thick envelope on the table. "I kept every letter your wife sent me," she said. "Every message, every email, from the day we met." My breath caught. She... Evie nodded. "She introduced us, Tom. Remember? That little community forum she used to help run online before she got sick? She saw me post about my husband passing, reached out, said you were lonely, that you needed someone who understood grief." I sank into the chair. "She told me I'd have to be patient, that you'd resist, that your kids might not understand. But she said if I could wait, you'd be the kind of man worth that waiting." I opened the envelope. There they were. Dozens of emails, notes, even an old screenshot of a forum post where Margaret wrote, "If my husband ever loves again, I hope it's someone kind. Someone who can see his hands still remember how to build." Mike was stunned. This buries them," he said. "This proves your wife wanted you to have joy again. This makes Evie the continuation, not the threat." I scanned every document. We attached them to the case. 2 days later, their lawyer withdrew the challenge. Silence followed. Not a word from Dan. Nothing from Kate. Laura deleted every public account. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Because there was still one more move to make. The house, the workshop, the garden, every inch of this life. I signed the final document on a Friday morning. Mike stood over my shoulder as the notary stamped it. I, Thomas Hale, hereby place the Rustin Hart property and all associated assets into a perpetual public trust for the continued use as a non-profit sanctuary and woodworking collective for mental health and creative restoration. Evie, named as director. Micah, permanent apprentice coordinator. The kids, gone, entirely, irrevocably. Mike smiled. You've built something no one can touch now. I looked out at the shed, the smell of cedar and coffee mixing in the wind. They touched me long enough, I said. It was Evie's idea to host the memorial night, not for anyone who'd passed recently, but for Margaret, for the legacy, for the silence we'd both been carrying in different ways. It had been 8 years since we buried her, and somehow it still felt unfinished, like she'd left a room and hadn't come back yet. We didn't advertise it, didn't post online or hand out flyers. We let word slip the way it does in towns like ours, through neighbors, whispers, church announcements. I invited a handful of people. Evie asked Micah to set up extra chairs just in case. We called it Letters from the Living. The idea was simple. Come, sit, and read something you've written to someone you've lost. Could be a letter, could be a story, could be a single sentence you never got to say. We didn't set rules, just candles and chairs and an open door. The night came colder than expected. Leaves scraped across the pavement as people shuffled in. 20, 30, then closer to 50. Some familiar, some new. Jeanette brought oatmeal cookies again. Hal brought his dog tags and held them tight in his palm like they might still carry heat. Evie set the tone with a short reading about memory. Then Micah read something he'd written to the father he never knew. I didn't need you to stay, he said, voice shaking. I just needed to know why you left. The room held its breath. One by one, people stood and spoke. A woman read a love letter to her sister. A teenage boy shared a poem he wrote after his grandfather died. Someone else recited lyrics they'd written but never sang. The shed felt sacred, like even the rafters were listening. Then Evie nodded to me. My turn. I stood, but I didn't read. Instead, I walked to the workbench at the front of the room and opened the old wooden box I'd kept hidden behind my lathe for nearly a decade. Inside was a cassette tape, labeled in Margaret's handwriting, in case you need to remember. I held it up. My wife was the kind of woman who prepared for everything, I said, including how to be remembered. Micah clicked the old player on. A moment of static. Then, her voice, clear, calm. That Sunday morning tone she used to have when coffee was warm and the world hadn't yet interfered. Tom, she said, if you're listening, I'm not here. Obviously. And if you're playing this in front of people, then you've either lost a bet or finally decided to stop being so damn stubborn. A few chuckles. I closed my eyes. I know you. I know how quiet you get when you're hurting. I know how you hide your grief behind projects. But I also know your love is the kind that builds things. You build warmth, safety, home. The tape clicked slightly. She must have paused it to gather herself. I only have one fear, she continued. It's not dying. It's not you being alone. It's the day your kindness runs dry. Because when that happens, Tom, you'll stop giving people chances they don't deserve. And I don't know what that version of you looks like. She paused again. But maybe you're playing this because that day came. I opened my eyes. Dan was there, standing in the back, Laura beside him, Kate too. No announcements, no apologies, just there, quiet, still. The crowd didn't notice them at first, but I did. Their eyes were red, their posture stiff, like they hadn't expected me to still have her voice. Margaret went on, "If you found someone new, I hope they're good to you. And if your kids made her feel unwelcome, shame on them. Forgive them if you can, but protect yourself if you must." Evie reached for my hand. "She deserves to be loved," Margaret's voice said, "and you deserve to love without guilt." The tape ended with a click that felt like the closing of a door. The room sat still. Then someone clapped, then another, and suddenly the whole place rose with applause. Not loud, but firm, honest, the kind of respect you don't ask for, the kind you earn by surviving. When the room cleared out, Dan stepped forward. His hands were shaking. "I didn't know she'd said all that," he muttered. "You never asked." Laura wiped her eyes. "We thought we were protecting you." "You weren't," I said. "You were protecting yourselves from change, from the idea that I could be happy again without your permission." Kate didn't speak. She just handed me something. A photo, me and Margaret, from the summer of '89. She was holding a tape recorder. "I found it in a box in the attic," Kate whispered. "Didn't know what it was until tonight." I held the photo between us like proof. "You all thought I needed management," I said. "But what I needed was space, and you made me fight for it." They looked down. "I'm not asking for an apology," I added. "Just recognition." Dan finally nodded. "You got it." They turned to leave, but I stopped them with one last thing. "If you ever want to build again," I said, "start by picking up a tool, not a calculator." They left. Evie stepped beside me. "What now?" she asked. I looked at the empty chairs, the flickering candles. "Now," I said, "we wait." Winter came in slow, like someone who didn't want to be noticed. The days got shorter, the sawdust took longer to dry, and the light in the shed turned that soft gold that made even broken things look like heirlooms. Rust and Heart didn't slow down. If anything, it grew. A local high school reached out, asked if we'd consider hosting a semester-long mentorship program. We said yes. A therapist from Portland sent clients to us for non-verbal processing. We said of course. Hal, the veteran who used to just stand in silence, started leading a weekly grief support group. And Evie? She turned the front room into a lending library with a donation box and a take one, leave one policy. She filled it with everything from woodworking manuals to poetry books to grief memoirs. Every Saturday morning, the place smelled like cinnamon and cedar. Micah showed up early, always early, already talking about starting a second location one day. "This is gonna outlive all of us," he said once. I believed him. But something else started shifting too. My phone, once quiet, started buzzing again. Not with insults, not with silence, but questions. Kate wrote first, a real letter, on paper. It wasn't an apology. She didn't beg. She didn't grovel. But it was real. "I don't know how to make things right," she wrote, "but I want to understand how they went so wrong." Laura followed. A text, short and clumsy. "If I came to the shop, would that be okay?" Dan didn't reach out directly, but Micah said he saw him parked across the street one afternoon, just sitting in his car for nearly 20 minutes, staring at the shed. Never got out, never even rolled the window down. Evie asked me what I wanted to do. "Forgiveness isn't the same as restoration," I told her, "but it can be the door." So I built one, literally, a tall, simple wooden door, oak, heavy. I carved the top with vines and leaves, the way Margaret used to doodle in the margins of church bulletins. At the bottom, I inlaid brass letters. Micah helped me with the burnishing. It read, "Family is who builds beside you, not who waits for the will." I mounted it to the wall of the workshop, facing the entrance. A few weeks later, Kate came. She walked in slow, hands in her coat pockets. The place was busy, teenagers sanding, an old man carving a spoon, someone crying quietly in the corner while Hal just sat beside them. She looked around, took it all in. Then she saw the door, read it, stared at it. I didn't rush her. When she finally turned to me, her eyes were glassy. "I deserve that," she said. I didn't argue, but I didn't turn her away either. "You can come any time," I told her, "but leave your ego at the door." She nodded. Later, she helped Evie sort donated books. The next week, Laura came, sat in the reading nook for half an hour, then asked Micah if he'd show her how to sharpen a hand plane. Dan didn't show, but that was okay. This wasn't about forced reconciliations or dramatic apologies. This was about truth, about giving people the chance to try again if they could put down the tools of entitlement and pick up something useful. One night, as Evie and I locked up, I asked her if she ever missed the quiet life we'd once talked about, before Rust and Heart became a movement, before my name got printed in articles and our story became something people whispered about at church potlucks. She laughed. "I was never built for quiet." I grinned. "Me neither, apparently." We turned off the lights. In the dark, the wooden door gleamed softly, not because of the finish, but because of the weight of what it meant. I thought about Margaret, about what she'd say if she could see it all now. I think she'd be proud, not just of the walls we built, but of the ones we tore down, and the ones we chose not to rebuild. The kids were no longer my legacy. Neither was the house, or the money, or the memories of what used to be. This space, the laughter, the noise, the grief and glue and healing, this was the legacy. And the door? It's still open. It always will be.